Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Rendezvous with Anza Saqib on CxO Global TV. CxO Global Forum is a knowledge-sharing platform for all C-levels across the globe. We take massive pride in contributing to the knowledge economy with our League of Extraordinary Thought Leaders. Today as well, we've got a very special gentleman joining us. His name is Mr. Ali Ahsan, and he is the principal at Boston Consulting Group. Welcome to the show, Ali. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anza. My first name is Ahsan, by the way.
Got it. So, we've heard a lot about you. I've gone through your LinkedIn profile as well, and, there are some great accomplishments. But what we're interested in knowing is where exactly did this journey begin? Perhaps what courses you studied, what was your professional experience like, and how did you end up here?
Sure. So it's quite a broad question, but I'll try and answer it succinctly. So I'm from Islamabad, which is where the journey began. After school, I came to London to study, and I did my accountancy exams. So I did ACCA. And back then, it took about 3 years to do that. And then I joined a private equity firm, which was handling a portfolio of companies. And I was sort of in their finance department, helping them through mergers and acquisitions and post-merger integrations, etc. So I spent about 4 to 5 years of my career, started off there, learned a lot, changing big companies, changing hands and assets and stuff. So it was quite good exposure early on. And from there on, I moved on to CxO Global, which owns brands like Dulux and ICI Paints in general. So a chemicals and decorative paints company where I did a lot of finance and systems integration stuff, and did that for a couple of years. And then I moved on to Kerry Foods, which is an FMCG, and I did a lot of business partnering there from a finance perspective with marketing and sales pertaining to new product development and launches and product promotions, etc. And throughout my career, I had worked quite a bit with consultancies on various, optimization projects, etc. And grass felt greener on the other side. So in Kerry Foods, I was working with Accenture. So, I made the transition from being an industry person to a consultant back in 2014. And I really enjoyed it so far, the variety and the impact of the work, etc. And I've been in BCG for the past couple of years. So briefly, that's where I'm from.
Quite an illustrious career, I must say. So what exactly does your role at BCG entail?
So simply put, Anza, I'm a management consultant, and I help businesses devise their strategies. I help them evolve to be more competitive and relevant, and that translates into different things on a case-by-case basis, right? So sometimes my work is focused on operational excellence, which incorporates things like redesigning their operating models and organization structures, enabling building businesses to be more digital and agile, etc. And that includes changing their processes and creating new capabilities. So that's sort of one cluster of things. In other cases, it's about helping clients boost their effectiveness. For example, balancing sort of, their traditional and digital marketing, optimizing their cost effectiveness. And I've also helped companies with their growth strategies, including, route to market, supply chain, pricing their products, etc. And last but not least, I also help clients with transactions, which is where my sort of career began. Like I mentioned, assessing divestment and carve-out opportunities or merger and acquisition opportunities, primarily in private equity. But regardless of the nature of work and what capabilities that creates for clients, the end goal usually is to boost the share price if it's a listed company, or if it's a privately held company, it's to make the portfolio more profitable.
Absolutely, sounds quite impactful. Now, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges for businesses post-pandemic, and how can these be turned into opportunities?
It's a good question. So the pandemic has had a major impact on the world economy, not just in the sense that everything stopped, but I'm talking about behaviors, and quite a few of those are permanent shifts. And in my work in the past couple of years, I've spent a lot of time thinking through it in terms of what impact there is and the solutions of it as well. So, you hear about things like supply chain issues and labor shortages and inflation and, shifts in consumer behavior, shifts in ways of working. All of those, I think, stem from the pandemic. Some are here to stay, some will go away. But I'll touch on a couple of these where I feel, to answer your question, they can be turned into opportunities. The first one is consumer behaviors. So the shift to online has been accelerated, I'd say, by about 10 years. And companies now have a lot of data which they previously just did not have. I mean, certain B2C businesses had, like telcos, etc., but generally speaking, they did not. Now there's a lot more data because the customer journey has become more digital, be it someone opening a bank account or someone going to purchase diapers. There's some element of digital in there. And that yields a lot of data. And this data can be used by businesses to unleash all sorts of competitive advantages, for example, to create new customer segmentation, leveraging AI, targeted advertisements, etc. So there's a lot of opportunity for revenue growth. That's the top line side of things. Now, the second thing is ways of working, which I alluded to. So we're all used to Zoom calls like you and I are talking right now. And I even know some colleagues are using, augmented reality with VR glasses to make it a bit more tangible, which works really well. But point is, you don't have to be in the vicinity. You don't have to be present. And for businesses and candidates, that opens up your talent pool. It creates a wider net. It allows companies to hire talent relatively agnostic of location and, with more focus on the competence and skills that they need. And also for the talent pool out there, especially in IT, people can venture beyond your typical sort of outsourcing contracts because employers really are looking beyond borders now for talent. And personally, I think that's something Pakistan can benefit from immensely.
Absolutely. Some very pertinent points made. Now let's speak a little about the public sector. How can governments, especially of developing economies like Pakistan, achieve sustainable growth and ensure that they build an ecosystem for startups to thrive?
So I'll answer that in two phases. So firstly, in terms of sustainable growth, I think that's the pain of our lives as Pakistanis, right? So I'll give an outside-in perspective because I'm not very familiar with the inner workings of the Pakistani government. But I think the crux of it is that there's an imbalance in terms of payments, right? So we also call it deficit in our dollar accounts, etc. But that for me is the core issues that needs to be resolved, which everyone talks about, of course, right? But there are some enablers for that. And I guess the question is, what do you import the most? And that's energy, right? That's oil and gas. So we need a lot of projects that create sustainable sources for energy for us. I appreciate coal is a bit controversial because of climate commitments, etc. But generally speaking, we're an atomic power. So, those kind of things can, really lead to a longer term balance in terms of imports and exports. And generally, I think there needs to be a harder stance, not just on, taxation of luxury items, etc., but genuinely, curtailing on these kind of things, which, which are more luxury than not, right? And then the second thing, which I haven't really heard being spoken about a lot in Pakistan, and I've personally advised a few African governments on this, is revenue generation with the private sector, right? So I feel governments should diversify their revenue generation portfolio, and tax collection, obviously, we know is the primary source, but the tax collection system in developing countries is not very sophisticated. And of course, that should be improved. But it should also expand beyond that. The government, I'll take Pakistan again as an example, the government has land. It has the power to subsidize. It has the power to make it easier to do business. there are already a lot of infrastructure projects underway. So even something as simple as building a mall with the private sector with a profit sharing proposition will yield benefits. And you have different providers in cities for sanitization, and put things up for consolidated tenders. And these are not just examples I'm coming up with on a whim here. This is tangible stuff that a lot of different developing nations have done quite successfully. And a key enabler for all of this, of course, is digitization. And when processes are digital, they just become transparent, right? E-procurement with live bids, etc., leave very little room for malice or error. So there's a lot that can be done in that space. Now, to answer your sort of the second part of your question, what can we do for startups to thrive? And I think, Pakistan is in the eye of the storm in a good way, in the sense that there's so much happening in this space, but we keep looking at venture capitalists and angel investors, and there's quite a few, good ones that have come from the Silicon Valley and other places. And what surprises me is the amount startups are asking for initially. It's really not a lot of money, especially in their initial seeding rounds. And the government, I feel, should invest in those. The UK, as an example, has a very successful scheme, which is net positive, by the way. And it can be net positive for the Pakistani government as well. The use cases and the business models are pretty impressive for most of these startups. The government can help them prove those use cases at speed, because the problem these young startups face is that, they keep burning cash, but they need more to prove a use case at a level at which they can go public or get more investment, et cetera, et cetera. So, and sure, some will fail. Of course, some will fail. But it's, the government can certainly do, and I'm not even talking about loans here. I'm talking about partnership, right? And that does yield net positive results. There are not-for-profits who are doing that, like Karandaz. I know there's a company in Islamabad that's funded by DFID that's doing that really well. So I think the government should get in on the action as well.
Absolutely, some very valid policy recommendations in the context of Pakistan, and thank you for sharing those with us. Now, moving on, what I did make from your conversation so far, one of the most important elements happens to be multi-stakeholder partnerships, and that is definitely worth exploring in the context of Pakistan. Now, moving on, one of the areas in which businesses have been continually facing, facing deadlocks as well in the corporate sector has been, negotiations and conflict resolution in the workplace. What is your take on this?
So I think it stems from culture, right? I think there's that work in any workplace. I'm not talking just about Pakistan. That may be a bit more exaggerated in Pakistan, but everywhere, right? I work a lot in the UK and the US, everywhere. So you've got, the leadership, and then you've got sort of millennials, and you've got Gen Z as well. So I think just really understanding the needs and the motivations for each is quite important, right? So what I'm quite encouraged by is the next generation after me. Their primary motivator is not money. Their primary motivator is purpose. So why should I work for you? Why? I mean, yes, money, fine, but what else, right? Well, what are you doing about climate? What are you doing about diversity? What are you doing about inclusion, etc. So there's those sorts of things, I think, that perhaps 20 years ago weren't on top of mind, but that's a requirement in terms of getting new talent in, or getting good talent in anyway. So I think there's a lot of conflict in terms of the mindset, first of all, that needs to be addressed through interventions and things like that to bridge that gap a bit as well. And the second thing is, there's some advice that I give to sort of professionals anyway, in the sense that, there's a lot of gap in terms of skill set as well, in both directions, right? So people who are senior did not grow up with, a mobile phone, for example. I personally didn't grow up with a mobile phone, right? And I'm not that old. So, and then there's people who can do programming with one eye closed, and, they come in.
Digital natives.
Digital natives, exactly. So I think they both have an opportunity to learn from each other, but not just in terms of the hard skills, but also the softer sort of mindset as well. And I think, there's a lot of wisdom, in terms of years of experience. If I look at my leadership, if I have like 4 people in the room, there's about 100 years worth of experience in there, which I would be foolish not to leverage and learn from, right? And likewise, if I didn't quite, especially after the pandemic, didn't quite learn from the people reporting into me as to how I can most effectively do my work and communicate, that would be a loss as well. So I think those two things in combination, I think it's just, more camaraderie, more openness to learning from each other would really help.
Right. Now, you have been advising a lot of businesses and governments, perhaps, but we'd like to hear some advice for mid-career professionals right now, because as I speak to a lot of them, one of the biggest concerns is that in the future, developers and IT professionals seem to see a ray of light, a ray of hope. But let's say someone who spent 10 years in marketing, conventional marketing, or someone that is, into another profession or another discipline, they feel like their jobs will become obsolete after some time. How would you critically analyze this statement, and what would your advice for these mid-career professionals be?
Yeah, so Anza, that question is very close to my heart, because I am one of those professionals. Not my work. Maybe it is now, but it was never very digital or IT oriented, etc. And I've got a finance background, like I mentioned, so similar to marketing or sales, etc. So I think, and my first job actually is redundant, right? I was in a payables and receivables function, which is done by robotics now. So I can completely relate to that, first of all. I think the second thing is, there is opportunity to develop, and I'll be more specific in a second, but I think, continuous development, people should ask themselves at whatever point in their careers, what really is your ambition, and what are the deltas you need to plug to get there, right? And in terms of marketing, I work with marketers quite a lot as a consultant, and I work in the industry with marketers as a business partner as well. Before, it used to be, okay, we buy this many adverts, and on a whim, we'll target the right audience and the right programs, and that'll be that. Now it's about balancing efficiency and effectiveness. It's about ROI and how much you invest and how much you get back with that, and not even talking in detail about the whole social media and digital side of things. So every role pretty much has evolved to an extent, and I don't mean you have to be super tech savvy for that, but you have to have sort of a basic understanding of what's going to make your effort more effective, right? And I think there's a lot of resources that people can, you can be excellent at what you do, but there's always room to grow with current advancements in technology, changes in macroeconomic factors and geopolitical factors. And I personally feel if you're not going forwards, you're going backwards, because knowledge becomes stale and obsolete very quickly. And I get that reading 10 books a month isn't everyone's cup of tea. It's not mine. But there's other avenues now, and you can find a mentor, go to networking events like the CxO forum, join different forums, and you'd be surprised at how much you can learn just by sharing your problems, right? And in my personal sort of journey, there's I do a lot of cost reduction, and not too long ago in 2016, we used to have like 200 people in a back office looking through transactional data and categorizing them. Now we have 4 people, and it takes them 2 weeks, and they do it leveraging AI. Do I know AI? Not at all. But I proactively sort of read about it. I attended a few courses. Even in a Pakistani firm, this company Dice Analytics that runs really good courses in Pakistan on AI, which I attended as well, cost me a fraction. And based on that, I am now sort of the go-to person as the bridge between the data scientists and the business end of people who can't really talk to each other, right? So I think you have to take initiative in that sense. So there's that. So I think, but yes, it is tricky, right? I won't sugarcoat it, especially for the middle generation like mine. It is quite tricky to sort of you almost have to upskill yourself from scratch. So it's not an easy road. The second thing I feel is, and it also plays to this, is you should develop your people. And my personal approach has always been to make my job redundant, right? And if I do that, the only place left to go is up. And the way you make your job redundant, not in, I don't mean automation, I mean, it's, by giving your team opportunities to shine with the right level of cushion for failure, right? And you'd be surprised that, like I mentioned before, at how much you can learn from, the younger guy. Even someone coming in now into a marketing department, I can promise you will know a hell of a lot more about, the technical aspect of things than I would. Right. So I think leveraging that team to plug that gap would be quite good as well.
Very insightful indeed. Now let's move a little bit about your personal life, right? So what inspires you to show up to work every single day?
I'd say three things. The first thing is the impact that my work creates, right? I get to read about what I do in what I personally do, not what my colleagues do, but what I personally do in the Financial Times, in the Wall Street Journal, etc. And that is quite motivating, right? So, I'm not just a cog in a machine. In some ways I am, but at least the work that I collectively do with my team has a very, very tangible impact on the world, right? And that includes everything from sort of the more capitalist side of things, the money creation, but also the more meaningful stuff. Like I won't go into details, but like I've worked a bit on the Ukrainian sort of crisis side of things as well, and helped out a lot on that. And that's truly rewarding for me. And so I think the impact side of things is one thing. The second thing is the culture. I think the culture that I work in is quite collegiate. And the things that I've mentioned, like diversity and inclusion, is very important to the firm. Obviously, I'm Muslim and I'm fasting. And just on Friday last week, there was a call attended by 100 plus people within the firm where they were just educating people about fasting, what it is, what the ethos is about, the spirituality of it, but also how to be cognizant of the fact that if someone is fasting, how you should treat them, how you should approach them, do not arrange calls out of tari, etc., etc. So it sounds little, but it's a big factor for me. The second thing, I guess, it's quite entrepreneurial. If I do feel like I want to work on something, or if I want to personally develop myself on something, there's no barriers as such. I define what I need to do, and then I'm supported well enough to do that. And because the learning opportunities are immense, the opportunities of going, to the world's top business schools and conferences for discussions with various C-suite veterans, etc. So all these things combined are quite motivating. And last but not least, I think the new generation that is coming into the business, the drive and the competence they have is, that it's insane. So all of these things.
Brilliant. Now, it's been an honor and a privilege talking to you. Unfortunately, we only have time for one or two more questions, but I would really like to know, how is it that you unwind?
In a very geeky way. So I've got I've got two kids, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. But taking care of them is, it can be unwinding sometimes, but it can be more tiring than other times. But I've always been into sort of computer gaming since I was quite young. Back in the day, I used to have a Commodore 64, and then blah 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 blah. And now I've got built my own sort of gaming PC that I do that and then wind down and play online with friends. But generally, my wife and I are avid, travelers. We live when COVID obviously hit us hard, but now that it's open, we just planning the traveling excites us, maybe even more so than the traveling itself. So yeah, it's a combination of a few different things, I guess, depending on stage of life. And here, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of friends from back home, people I've known since I was probably 7, 8 years old. They've all sort of migrated here and settled here. So I've got a very closely knit circle, and socializing with them is also a key part of it.
Lovely. So towards the end, I would like to ask you, what do you think is the utility of forums like CxO Global? You did briefly highlight on some of the advantages, but from a personal standpoint, how is being a part of CxO Global benefiting you?
So there's two prongs to that. I think as an expat, it really helps me stay connected to what's happening back home from a professional standpoint, right? So first of all, but that's very sort of Ahsan centric. But first and foremost, to me, it's a think tank, right? People are voluntarily coming together for ideation and thought leadership. That's what I see in our WhatsApp group, in our app that you have, and everywhere, right? So what I would love is for this to be more systematized, and providing mentorship to startups like you mentioned. We could do it, right? Yeah. There's a lot of different skill set here, not just IT, but people like myself who advise businesses on a daily basis. And same goes for the government angle. The government definitely does need advice on niche topics pertaining to cost efficiencies, growth, various functional expertise, etc. So I think, and I've also seen this forum used very successfully for talent acquisition, and that's really nice to see as well, right? Because people, advertising jobs and then placing the right talent in the right place, etc. So I think there's so many prongs to it, and just generally networking, right? People, like-minded people. Just whenever I go to Pakistan, I'll make sure I hunt down a couple of people who are available at the time in Islamabad and just get together. So I think there's so many things that I'm using this for right now. But I think a more concerted effort, and I'm part of it as well, would really help, bring us forward as the think tank element that I mentioned, and advising sort of, industries or, policymakers on what should happen. That would, for me, be the end goal.
Right. Thank you so much, Ahsan, for your time. And we really appreciate it. Please keep contributing to the knowledge economy.
Okay. Thanks so much, Anza.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, that'll be all for today. We'll see you next time with another very interesting guest. Please keep us updated with your comments and feedback.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.